be it for biblical, spiritual, or political reasons, economic reasons, all sorts of reasons. People have been worried about the apocalypse being right around the corner and been certain it was going to happen in some form or fashion for thousands and thousands of years. And it seems evident, kind of, from the length of time that's gone on, that that's not really likely, at least up until the point where we finally learned how to manufacture our own potential apocalypse with nuclear war. But even the way militaries would be distributing their strikes wouldn't necessarily wipe out the entire planet. I mean, humanity itself will survive. And so, to me, a true apocalypse has to be something that takes us all out. And actually, really, by my standards, an apocalypse has to be a universe-ending event. And I don't believe there's anything contained within physics that can do that, beyond the fact that the universe itself will dissipate at some point trillions of years from now. So I guess you could say the universe has a built-in apocalypse, but we're way beyond ever going to being around to experience that. There is no way to experience that. But yet we have this subconscious thing that's probably both maybe a little bit of a genetic imprint, because animals in evolution are somewhat event-driven creatures, and certain conditions being experienced over and over and over again will cause creatures to change. Basically, you evolve because you have to. If you don't have to evolve, if you don't have to change, then you don't change. That seems to be kind of the general rule of things on the planet, regardless of whatever mutation rates are. Hence the fact that you have species that have existed the whole time with minimal modification, and yet other things have gone and all sorts of crazy. We are one of the most crazy things to have evolved, and the circumstances of exactly what happened to our ancestors to get us to this point are kind of impossible to fully unravel, because so much shit's lost and it's impossible to really know. But it's still fun to conjecture over. And so what left this imprint on us? Well, this is my own take on it, sourced from a few things. It's not like I've come up with this entirely just out of the ether, just kind of my own take on stuff I've heard and put together. 10,000 years ago, that was the end of the Ice Age. And regardless of how you want to think of what caused the Ice Age to end, there would have come a breaking point where the heat level had taken all these ice caps that were up to 2 miles thick, and they were just sitting on top of the continents, had melted enough of the core of them that you'd have these big giant lakes and fissures contained but behind ice walls. But there'd finally be this breaking moment where the whole thing would start to collapse. And at that point, all this water is pouring across the entire breadth of continents, washing everything away. And that's probably why there's so many common flood myths throughout the world that have mutated and changed and grown over time. Apparently, at some point, somewhere in Central Asia, when that happened, a dude saved his family and a couple of goats and some chickens and some shit on a little boat he had put together. And ever since then, we have stories of Gilgamesh and Noah and stuff like that. And different thing happened on, over here. And it scarred us. It completely destroyed whatever civilization we had. We probably had nothing that was written, and we probably weren't like making sophisticated buildings, but we at least were sophisticated enough to be doing shit like by using wood and animal parts to make, various tools and structures, especially since there's all the big megafauna of the time, to make extensions off of natural rock formations to create this, a primitive version of fortifications and cities and all that kind of shit. You could almost kind of view it as like a Hyborian world if you're into Conan, just without all the Atlantis bullshit. We know human beings have had boats technology for a long time, the ability to get around to places that they had to have had basic sailing technology, even if it was just like basic rafts and canoes and all that kind of stuff. We know we've had that for thousands upon thousands of years, just to have been able to have gotten to certain places where humans were for as long as they have been, predating the final breakup of the ice shields in North America and Europe and Russia. Russia had the least kind of problem with it in its own way, and that might be why Siberia and Central Asia seem to be the source point for Asian civilization having rearisen. African civilization seemed to got knocked down really bad, and North American civilization just kind of had its slate cleaned out, had to be resettled. But those that already penetrated into Central and South America were not nearly so affected, if affected at all. And so that's probably a good chunk of why those populations were the first to get back to building cities with stone structures and that kind of stuff. Over here, where, of course, over here, the population density was much less and there's less competition and need. Civilizations are an emergent thing. People, it's not like people invent the idea, and it's why they kind of pop up spontaneously in certain areas. And the reason why it's more about the area than it is the people that are in the area. Is because of the natural circulation of tribal nomadic movements. For the longest time, we were semi-nomadic peoples. Like, we had our certain spots where we get both types of food and plant matter to eat, but we'd have to cycle around. We had not even the concept yet that we could like drag the earth around and change the course of rivers and all that kind of shit. We were still simpler, but we were smart enough to like figure out to wear clothes. I mean, we still have the exact same brains that we had now, and there's imprints of things that seem to like the whole concept of astrology and like how long those cycles are, and for that to have already been established, like, implies that that's been a thing for a long time. And but when those ice dams collapsed, flooded entire continents, not just river valleys, entire continents were flooded. Only people like living up in high mountain areas around stone and shit were likely to survive, and anything like man-made at the time out of natural materials, biological materials of plant and animal parts, all that shit would have been washed right out in the ocean. And so long has passed that it's not, that kind of shit's not going to be found, except for maybe the few little stone flints and chips and stuff. And there's evidence of this to a degree in Doggerland. But the trauma of that overall event has been imprinted onto our culture and imprinted kind of almost into our way of thinking on some sort of primal level, because it was so intense a thing that happened. Except now, instead of fearing another flood, our fear is a fiery apocalypse. And that seems to have been the case for a couple thousand years now. It's not like that's some newer thing. Although, as I say, we've kind of manufactured a capability of bringing that about now with nuclear technology. And then there's the whole global warming thing. Both things that we fear always seem to be heat based. And that is also the weird thing is like, as a culture, we've become secular, and overall people have kind of abandoned, even the people who still cling to Christianity and the Christian identity are not nearly so literal minded about it as they used to be. And yet you still have the apocalypse cults, and you have people starting to freak out about other things that might be an apocalyptic event. And it's telling. It's telling. Like, the exact happenstances of what was going on and what we were beforehand are hard to tell. But in terms of like an event that explains the Noah's Ark story and explains why we still seem to be hung up about disaster around every corner. Yeah, the end of the ice age, at one point, it wasn't just that the ice slowly melted away and everything was fine. There was a point where these gigantic 2 mile high walls of ice just split apart and an ocean's worth of water just spilled out across all the land around. So, anyway, have a good one.